Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everyone joining today for our Psychosexual Impact of Cauda Equina webinar. My name's Kevin Saul and I'm a Senior Associate in the Medical Negligence team at Irwin Mitchell. I've got the pleasure to be your host this afternoon and I'm joined by my colleague Julianne Moore, who's one of the partners, and she'll chair the panel Q&A discussion. Together, we're part of a national team of solicitors at Irwin Mitchell who act for clients who've suffered from Cauda Equina, as well as other spinal injury claims as well. Through our work, we obviously see the devastating impact of this syndrome on our clients. So this is the latest in our series of webinars, Let's Talk About Cauda Equina. In the previous ones, we've looked at a variety of issues, including how to identify early signs and symptoms, the importance of early diagnosis, and also living with the physical consequences of that diagnosis. Today's webinar highlights a very important and different and often overlooked aspect of the impact of Cauda Equina. In my experience, clinical focus of treatment and rehabilitation is often on the physical side and the impact of the diagnosis. But it's also vital for healthcare professionals to support the patients and their partners come to terms with the psychological and psychosexual consequences. Today, we've got some great speakers, and I'd like to thank them for giving up their time to join us. First of all, we're really privileged to be joined by Dr. Cosine Ford, who's a consultant clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist. She co-founded the Yorkshire Pain Clinic in Leeds. She's an internationally renowned expert in the field of spinal injuries, having worked in a regional spinal injuries unit as part of an MDT rehab team for the last 20 years. Her work's also included supporting patients cope with their trauma and distress, as well as concerns about relationships and the future. We will then have a comfort break for around 5 minutes before we're joined by Claire Thornber, who has bravely agreed to share her story. Claire's the CEO of the Cauda Equina Champions charity, which she founded following her own injury, which caused life-changing consequences for her. She recognised through her own experience about the need for a patient support group, and the charity's grown from that early stage and now has over 5,400 members across the world. She's a passionate advocate for those touched by Cauda Equina and works tirelessly to drive change for such patients. And then following Claire's presentation, we'll have a panel discussion chaired by Julianne. Also on the panel will be Michelle Donald, who's an accredited psychosexual therapist and a senior member of the College of Sex and Relationship Therapists. She's over 20 years' experience in sexual issues relating to spinal cord injury. She's currently educating and supporting patients and staff at the Steps Neurological Centre in Sheffield and the Sue Ryder Neurological Centre in Preston. So if you've got any questions during any of the presentations, please submit them in the chat function and we'll try to come to them at the end as part of that Q&A panel session. We will be recording the session today and it will be sent out afterwards to everyone who's signed up to the webinar. We're aiming to try to keep to time, but if you've got to leave early or we're overrunning, then you'll be able to catch up on what you've missed when you receive the recording. And towards the end of the session, we'll also be posting a feedback link. It'd be helpful if you could take a couple of minutes of your time just to let us know your feedback on today's webinar and also what further topics you'd like us to cover in our future seminars. So that's enough from me, and I can now pass you over to Cosine for an overview on the psychological and psychosexual consequences of Cauda Equina. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Matt, can I move on to the next slide, please? That's the title slide. Before I start, I just want to put this talk into context. We're going to be discussing psychosexual impact of CES, but it doesn't occur in isolation, in a vacuum. It occurs within a whole host of other variables, a whole host of other issues that are related to CES, in particular the physical and the psychological. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about the physical because that's been covered elsewhere, but it does have a bearing on the psychological functioning of the individual, which then has a bearing on the psychosexual. So very briefly, the physical issues can be transient or permanent, related to the bladder, bowel, sensory, pain, mobility and motor, and also sexual dysfunction. My experience has been that individuals in the ward setting vary in how much they are ready and prepared to discuss the sexual issues. And I'll address that later on. Can I have the next slide, please? So I want to talk about the various forms in which psychological function can be affected by CES. And these can include depression, anxiety, there's body image issues that affect self-esteem. For example, patients or individuals are not as mobile. They may be wheelchair dependent. They're not exercising like they used to. They're on medication. Some of them have side effects of weight gain. There's also some surgery, the scarring. Body image becomes a major problem. Another issue is pain. Chronic pain can be so disabling and impact sleep and in turn on mood. The research has shown that individuals have a high risk of developing depression if they have a permanent neurological deficit. I've also had individuals that present with eating disorders. For example, they put weight on, they're in the wheelchair, they're not mobilizing, and they then don't eat, and we have some eating disorder issues. Substance misuse. In the old days, when cannabis wasn't prescribed, there used to be some patients who would use cannabis for pain relief, anxiety, and I'm so glad that it's now on prescription medicinal cannabis for anxiety, pain, and I think it's got quite a lot of importance and benefits for the psychosexual side as well. So I'm glad that's happening. Next slide, please. The other issues are a lot of them the CES patients in particular feel a sense of injustice. They just feel that they had the symptoms initially and they felt not believed, and sometimes it was a delay in diagnosis, and that's created a lot of anger. A lot of my patients report feeling helpless and hopeless about the future, and it's so difficult to get to the psychosexual side because you've got to plow through so many other issues. Sexual issues are personal, they're very sensitive and emotional, and to discuss these, you're opening a can of worms, and it has to be addressed in a very sensitive manner. Can I have the next slide, please? There's also the impact of the CES on life as a whole, on employment, on hobbies, leisure. In my experience, individuals who are very sporty and very active, who can no longer return to those activities, suffer significantly with mental health issues. There's also the problem of changing in relationships dynamics, sleep disturbance, fatigue. All of these factors are occurring, and then the individual's asked about their psychosexual issues, and they just look at you and say, you know, get real, I've got so many other problems. But it is an issue, and they need help to start discussing this. Can I have the next slide, please? So the World Health Organization has many definitions, but the one I like is this one here that says that the mental aspects of sexual health after an SCI or CES are as important as the physical aspects. It's important to feel good about your body and regain confidence to establish and maintain intimate relationships. That sounds great, but it's a real challenge. To try to achieve that, it's a minefield because you've got to go through so many other issues. As I said earlier on, there are psychological repercussions of CES, and some of these individually or cumulatively can impact the CES individual's sexuality, how they feel about themselves, their identity, their desires, their arousal, and in turn on sexual activity. So the research has showed that there's at least 40% of individuals with CES experience sexual difficulties. I consider that that's an underestimate. I suspect some individuals don't really want to talk about it, and that figure may be much higher. Can I have the next slide, please? CES can result in a range of sexual functional difficulties. They can affect men and women. I'm not going to go into the medical aspects. I'm sure the other experts can go into these in detail, but with males, it's mainly reduced sensation in the genital area that impacts the ability to get and maintain an erection or ejaculate. With women, it's often a lack of vaginal and perineal sensation can reduce the feelings during sexual activity. There are others, but I'm not going to go into them. I found that when I was on the ward, a lot of the patients were focusing on the medical, the physical side, and to get them to talk to me about mental health issues was a challenge. I would walk around with my mug of coffee, hide my badge, so they wouldn't know I was a psychologist, and then just start talking to them. And before they realised it, they were talking to a psychologist, and it was all right, took the stigma away. I also found that you have to pitch psychological input for psychological counselling and psychosexual at the time and the pace that suits the individual and their partner. And I'll discuss that in a bit more detail later. Can I have the next slide, please? There are so many variables that contribute to psychosexual difficulties in CES, and I'm just going to go through these very briefly. There's pain, chronic pain, spasms. There's the impact of medication. For example, pain relieving medication can reduce sensitivity of the skin. It can affect lubrications. It can affect arousals. You know, medication is important, but it's realizing that sometimes it might not be psychological. There may be some physical going on. There's also the impact of bowel and bladder difficulties. Individuals said they find degrading, and undertaking self-catheterizing, manual evacuation, these change their perception of the genitalia, so they don't associate them with pleasure, intimacy, and sexual activity. There's also the impact of spasticity. I found that age is important. You know, at what age has the diagnosis been made? Is it in somebody in their 20s, 30s, or is it somebody in their 40s, 50s, where menopausal issues are occurring? There's hormonal problems that are in the mix as well. It's also important to look at the relationship that the individual's in, the quality of the relationship, how enabling, how nurturing is it? What are the tensions? What are the difficulties? May I have the next slide, please? Also, you need to look at the personality traits of individuals. Have they had previous psychosexual issues? If they have, then they're at risk of having difficulties post-injury. A lot of individuals find it difficult to adjust to their new body. There's weight change, shape change, there's pain. They feel unattractive. They're also feeling guilty that they may not be able to perform sexually to their partners like they used to. There's a fear of rejection. All of these can impact on sexual confidence. I've discussed about weight gain, and I've discussed about physical issues. One patient actually said to me, I feel worthless. I just feel like nothing. And there are very low expectations of sexual activity, sexual life after CES. And it's important to just remove that myth that with the right help, the right support, that there are ways to have some form of appropriate sexual life. It may not be the same. It'll be different. But before you get to that, you've got to go through all these barriers, the psychological issues, engagement, the grief, the coming to terms, the loss of aspects of your sexuality. Can I have the next slide, please? I've mentioned other factors such as worrying about the partner's satisfaction. There's also the change of the role of the partner. It's not an intimate partner, they're viewed as a carer, and it's important that that's addressed. You need to get a balance in a relationship. Sometimes a lot of individuals don't want to talk about sex, that there's a fear of judgment. It's a very sensitive and personal topic, and it also triggers so many emotional issues. There's the added problem of partners may be afraid of having sexual intercourse or trying sexual strategies because they're fearful of causing further injury or pain to their CES partner. There's also the effect of the impact of the physical limitations of the CES on the partner. Their arousal levels may be affected, their desire issues affected. So this is something that needs to be focused into. Chronic pain, mobility, and worrying about things going on in life, finances, these psychological factors can impact the relationship balance and in turn on sexual relationships. The relationship of the dynamics of the relationship between partners changes, and that also has to be addressed. May I have the next slide, please? There are some people who are single at the time of the diagnosis of CES, and they're fearful that they've changed, and they're worried that they may not find a romantic partner relationship. Some individuals stated that in the initial stages, sexual rehabilitation was not their primary concern, and others have said that when it was more male orientated. This is changing now. Some individuals state that there are some clinical nurse specialists in the hospitals and on the spinal injury units, and that's positive. But the individuals are not always ready to engage at that time in the ward setting, and they would like to have some support when they've been discharged. Often they say when we are discharged, we're in the community, and if we do want counselling, we're referred to psychology or mental services, but they're not really equipped with sexuality, psychosexual counselling. That it's a very specialist area of counselling, and more of these expertise is required, and I'll discuss that towards the end. I think one of the things that the NHS are pretty good at are fertility counselling. Fertility doesn't usually get affected in CES for women, but they do need to make decisions about family planning. And so specialist fertility counselling is required there. So going back to what's been said initially, it's that immediately after CES, the focus has been on basic needs of survival, the medical, the physical, mobility, pain, getting home to the families. And sexuality isn't always the priority. And sometimes by the time the individuals got home, they've blocked it out and they've just disconnected. And that sows the seeds of problems with the relationships in the future. Can I have the next slide, please? So what helps? Well, if you think of psychosexual counselling, well, what is the definition of psychosexual counselling? It's trying to address and resolve the psychological and behavioural issues related to sexual functioning and relationships. There's a lot going on. You need input from various sources. There's medications like Viagra for men. There are aids, there are equipments, there's all sorts out there, which I will defer to appropriate experts to comment on. There's also medical surgeries for some of the complicated issues. There's psychosexual therapy for non-CES, non-disabled individuals. You have behaviour interventions, you've got cognitive therapies. We have psychodynamic therapies. There's a therapy called sensate focus. We also have compassionate focused psychosexual therapy. And recently, EMDR is being used. EMDR is normally used for trauma therapy, but it's also useful for psychosexual therapy as well. But the point to stress is that these psychosexual therapies have to be adapted and adjusted for the CES individuals and their partners, because there are so many other variables going on that I've discussed in the preceding slides that are related to physical issues. And then you've also got to address the other sexual issues like depression, like anxiety. And the way that psychology counselling, psychosexual counselling is moving is away from the biological model that used to see sexual difficulties as just neurological. We're now looking at the biological psychology social model. And what that says is that there's a continuum, it's ever-changing interaction. This is not static. And this has implications for therapy, that you can have your psychosexual counselling, but because this is constantly ongoing, you will have to constantly just go back, dip in and out. So don't expect a resolution. So it's trying to adopt an approach that's not just for the individual, but also for the couple, but knowing when to go for individual counselling and when to go for couple counselling. And it's also important to take into consideration cultures, religious beliefs, and value systems. There are various strategies that are worked through and addressed in psychosexual counselling. There's lots of self-exploration, experimentation, but you have to make sure the fear factor is addressed and the engagement issues are also addressed. May I have the next slide, please? So what helps? I'd just like to say research for CES psychosexual counselling is very little. The research on psychosexual counselling in non-CES individuals disabled is that it's effective for some people, not for everyone, and the benefits are not always maintained, but it can be effective. We don't have a lot of data on the effectiveness for CES individuals, but these are some of the things that have been reported as helping. Clarifying the role of the partner, you know, they're not just carers, they're also partners as part of a sexual relationship. Finding a balance between giving and receiving sexual pleasure between the individual and their partner. Some individuals have stated that when they were discharged home, that's the time they really wanted post-rehabilitation counselling, and that would have been helpful. But having said that, I've had some individuals that have said just before discharge, I would like to have psychosexual counselling. On the wards, I found that peers were really, really important in discussing psychosexual issues. And I'll never forget, there was an area called the 3-bedder unit, and a lot of the young men used to go there and just discuss things. And one morning I was walking past, and they thought they would embarrass me, and they said, Dr. Ford, we just want your opinion. The 3 of us all had erections this morning, and we wondered if you could measure them for us and see who's got the highest erection. Yeah. And I said, well, I'm really sorry, I haven't got a ruler small enough. And it just took away the sense of angst and the embarrassment. But what I did notice was they talked to each other. So peers are really important. What I also found was sometimes females want to talk to female therapists, and males want to talk to males. And when it comes to couple therapies, they don't mind. But again, the option should be there. I think the important thing was talking to others. CES individuals learned some coping strategies, useful tips for people who'd been there, who'd done it, and made some mistakes. And that included the sexual activities and sexual lives. Could I have the next slide, please? So peer counselling is important, and if I was asked, I would say if funding could be arranged to have volunteers or peers who could come into the wards, or maybe on an outpatient basis in the community, to be there to advise and discuss and just be a sounding board. What else helps? Someone with actual resources, a hub of information. So resources that help to think outside of the box, new ways to explore and experience sexuality within the restrictions issues caused by CES. And I think one of the most important statements was it's in this slide, it's in bold, it's considering ways of experiencing intimate connections that are beyond the traditional view of sexuality, which has been focused on erection, penetration, ejaculation. There is so much more to fulfilling sexual life, and that needs to be explored and looked into. And so taking away the myth, valuing intimacy, and post-injury, to look at the issues, and it's a problem-solving exercise. And also maintain privacy. It's trying to provide information in a way that you don't get into trouble when you're Googling it and putting all psychosexual issues. And therefore, it's important to have services that are discreet and also easily accessible. So, you know, advice seeking and privacy needs to be maintained. Could I have the next slide, please? Education and information before being discharged. The research has shown that sexual preparedness boosts feelings of competence and understanding. Some of the issues that some individuals have fed back to me while on the ward is that they weren't quite sure who they could approach. Some health professionals were approachable, some they weren't quite sure about the clinical confidence and accessibility. So I think some more staff training needs to be focused on. Also acknowledging that there are differences in individuals, the needs are different. There's diversity of requirements, and that's important. A feedback I had was that group psychosexual counselling was inappropriate. People felt very uncomfortable. They wanted face-to-face. Remote video counselling was not found very helpful because that qualitative aspect was missing. Again, having face-to-face counselling has cost implications. Can I have the next slide, please? So what else would help? I think the future, we need to have more awareness, more materials, written materials, more access to peers, more face-to-face counselling. I find that we have psychological mental health sessions, but then there also needs to be facility for more specialised psychosexual counselling. It's a niche in itself, and a clinical psychologist may not have the skills to deal with the more specialist areas, but the two need to go hand in hand. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so future, make sure resources are there, peer support is there, education is there. Make this a holistic activity, tailor it to the individual, but above all, take out the judgmental element, take out the embarrassment, but implement this in a way that takes into consideration all the other physical issues as well as psychological issues. And it's not a static issue, psychosexual functioning CES. It's constantly interacting with other factors. And just as you've solved one issue, another one comes in. Providing practical, concrete advice and support, and moving away from the biological and the physical aspect. And always trying to make sure that the individual is adjusting and coming to terms with the new you, and just stressing that psychosexual functioning difficulties can be addressed, they may not all be resolved. Sex life may not be like it used to. It's going to be different, but you can have one, and it's something that you need to work on with your partner, with an appropriate team. So I'm going to leave it at that. Have I gone over time?
No, that's perfect.
Yeah. But I just want to end for the legal team that if there are fundings for individual CES, that it's not just for the psychology counselling, but put extra costings for psychosexual, because that's another area that's often overlooked and has cost implications, and it's not easily accessible in the NHS. And I would say a contingency, because you may benefit for about 8 sessions, and 2 years down the line, something else has happened physically. So you need to go back and have some more top-up sessions. Yeah, so that's, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks very much, Cosine. That was a great overview of the issues which affect patients, and in particular, I think the highlighting the need for the specific advice throughout the rehab process is really important, and it's certainly something that, in my experience, clients have found lacking. And it's often they've dealt with the physical side of things, they're coming to terms with that, and then all of a sudden, their life moves on to different areas, and it just becomes more problematic for them again. If anyone's got any questions for Cosine, then please do send these through, and we'll try and address them in the panel discussion at the end. We're now going to take a short break, and then we're going to hear from Claire Thornber from the Cauda Equina Champions charity. Thanks very much. Hi, welcome back to today's webinar. We're now going to hear from Claire in relation to her experience with living with Cauda Equina and the ups and downs that this has had on her own feelings and on her relationships in her presentation, How Cauda Equina Syndrome Screwed Up My Love Life. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Kevin. So, hello, everybody. My name's Claire Thornber. I'm founder of Cauda Equina Champions charity, but I'm really here today with two hats on. One of somebody with a lived experience of chronic Cauda Equina syndrome, and then obviously with my work with our charity. Next slide, please. So, when I got the time I got Cauda Equina syndrome, I was 39. I was living my best life, I describe it at the time. I had two daughters. I was a single parent running my own business. I had a mortgage. I was running two vehicles, and I had a very active social and sex life. I was in a new relationship, and at the time I had no financial worries, no debts, and I was fiercely independent, enjoying doing the things I really wanted to do when I wanted to do them, really. So there's photos I put on the slides. There's one with me and my friend Marie. We went to the Black Eyed Peas concert. That was about 3 weeks before I had Cauda Equina syndrome. And I met my partner at the time, so I was flying backwards and forwards to Dublin, thinking I was living the really glamorous lifestyle. Next slide, please. So my Cauda Equina syndrome happened in September 2010. I did experience delays to surgery, which left me with chronic Cauda Equina syndrome. I was left in retention of bladder and bowels. I had very dense saddle anesthesia, so that was my genitals and buttocks were completely numb. When the disc herniated, the first thing to go was pins and needles in my genitals, and buttocks that quickly changed to dense numbness. Left with neuropathic pain that really gets worse on activity. I had numb feet and the backs of my legs were numb at the time, and I was experiencing leg weakness and loss of power. So walking upstairs and things like that was very difficult for me. Next slide, please. So I went into hospital as an emergency, and I spent 5 days on a ward afterwards. As a patient, I was really oblivious to my bladder and bowel issues. I had a 7-year-old daughter at home and a 17-year-old daughter, and I was really concerned about getting home and getting back to my family. The most information really I got from the nurses was, you can be discharged as long as you can wee into this bedpan, and when we've measured your output and things, that's when you can go home. So to perform for the nurses, really, I was trotting off to the toilet. Well, not very quickly, but getting myself to the toilet. I was ambulant. And to empty my bladder, I was pushing down on my tummy muscles with the palms of my hands, bending forwards and straining to wee. And that's how I managed to get out of hospital, really. So I left without a bladder scan, in retention, without catheters and things like that. I remember quite vividly being in bed asking members of staff for advice. How long were things going to be like this? Things are really numb. I'm really worried. I still can't feel anything. What about my sexual function? My genitals are numb, my bum's numb, what can you tell me about that? And the most advice I got at the time was, well, just wait 2 years and see how things are. We can't really tell you anything about that. But that was my overriding concern, was this strange feeling that some of this disconnect from my body. Next slide, please. So going home for me, after 5 days, I was given no advice at all. I was really very much in limbo, struggling to understand what had happened to me. Climbing the stairs on my hands and knees to get upstairs. Within 7 days of straining to empty my bladder, I'd had a uterine prolapse. It was very distressing. And it took me 7 weeks to get catheters from the hospital that had treated me, which were actually left in a gift bag on the side when the nurse had gone home. So I had to teach myself to self-catheterize as well. I lived with my partner at the time. He came to live with me and look after me. And I can remember going upstairs with him following behind me one day, and I was actually losing feces on the stairs, and he was sort of looking down and saying, what's that on the stairs? Where's that come from? And I'd completely been unaware that I'd been fecally incontinent going upstairs. I had accidents outside the house, so I had to take a change of clothes everywhere. One day he caught me in the bathroom, catheterizing, and the only way I could find to do it was standing up. And it was sort of a bit of a joke. So, what are you doing having a pee stood up? You know, you shouldn't be doing that. You're female. I've been asked by a few people at a time. My bowels were distended and I looked like I was 9 months pregnant. So I was having problems with body image and things were changing everywhere. So I spent the first 12 months probably watching a Dallas box set I got for myself, all 13 series on the settee, feeling sorry for myself. I put 2 stone on in 12 months, and literally I can remember for the first 6 months I cried myself to sleep every night. I couldn't believe that this where I was as a 39-year-old lady, and the whole experience I found to be very humiliating and dehumanizing, really, and stripped me of my identity at the time. That was very much based around being an attractive young lady, I think. Next slide, please. So my partner at the time asked me to marry him. I think he felt really sorry for me, and financially that was about the only thing I could do. So I rushed in to get married to him. The dense black numbness that I was feeling around that area kind of thing was creeping into my life as well, and I became more and more depressed. And the disconnect from my body was something that was really real. So my buttocks and my genitals felt like I was sat on 2 cold slabs of meat. I couldn't feel them. They were alien to me. And I only attempted to have sex perhaps on one or 2 occasions. And that was really traumatizing for me. That re-traumatized this struggle I was having with this sexual dysfunction. And if I had slept, the only way I can describe that feeling of being disconnected with it is if I shut my eyes and I'd slept with a football team, I wouldn't have a clue, because of actually all awareness had gone, all feeling and everything. So this is probably about 18 months after my injury, and I actually came across Michelle Donald. So I was Googling online trying to get some help with this sexual dysfunction and came across Michelle's profile and got in touch with her. So I went to see Michelle, who helped me personally, talk things through and things. But I was struggling to get my partner and get to engage with the therapy. His attitude was, well, actually, it's your problem. I'm okay. So perhaps after 1 or 2 times of attempting to have sex with my partner, I never had sex with him again. And subsequently, even though we got married quite early on, we were divorced 18 months later. Next slide, please. So my self-esteem had plummeted. I was avoiding relationships. How was I coping? I was dealing quite well once I got to grips with the catheters, and I'd been given Peristine, so that gave me control of the physical aspects of my condition. And I'd started volunteering part-time at 2 charities and running a small Facebook group for Cauda Equina Syndrome. So my coping mechanism really was to keep myself really busy and occupied. And as long as I was busy, I wasn't sort of wallowing in what was happening to me. I set the Cauda Equina Syndrome Association up. There was a non-profit at the time, and drew self-esteem really from my work. So it became my self-esteem and my identity came from my work as opposed to where it had been from different things earlier on, perhaps. Talking to other people and helping them really helped me. And the more I did it, the more I felt better about things. So that helped me slowly build my confidence back up. Next slide, please. So like an idiot, feeling a bit more confident, I decided to go into another relationship. But this time I thought I'd be a bit clever this time. I connected with somebody I knew before my injury, so somebody who knew the old me. I hid my disability, I hid my sexual dysfunction. I was desperately trying to be the person I wanted to be before I had Cauda Equina Syndrome, I think. And it wasn't something I enjoyed having sex with him. It was more about keeping him in relationship, and it was for him, not me. And as you won't be surprised to learn that probably 18 months later after that relationship failed too. So I was on divorce number 2 by this point. Next slide, please. So I've been divorced twice in a very short period of time. It was a wake-up call. I've been making some silly decisions, grasping at things, and I decided that actually I had to put my big girl pants on and accept my disability. Really, I'd accept my disabled identity. So I decided literally to embrace Cauda Equina Syndrome. So I had to change my mindset, really. I chose to be grateful for the things that I could still achieve and the things I was achieving at work. But to this day, I would say that the sexual dysfunctions is still probably the biggest thing that hurts, and it's the other things I can cope with, but that I can't really deal with. And I don't know why it's making me emotional, but it is. Next slide, please. So I'll just touch on the charity services before I go. So Champions Charity, we've been a charity since 2020. We're the leading voice for Cauda Equina Syndrome patients, and we're championing better outcomes for patients everywhere. We have a video to show you at the end, and I've jumped in with this next slide, but if that's okay, we can put it at the end of these slides. Next slide, please. So we offer psychosocial therapy services. I know Kosi mentioned that perhaps face-to-face is better. Unfortunately, we are restricted to online support for people. So we have clinical psychology, CBT therapy, psychosexual therapy with Michelle, Donald and Sue Lennon. We have started online group therapy for members as well. We have online family and carers therapy, wheelchair skills courses, monthly support group meetings, and Cauda Equina residential workshops. The residential workshops are always well attended. I think it goes back to the peer support aspect of things. So people are really keen to meet others and often leave feeling a lot better just having that chance to talk to everyone about all the problems that they're having. Next slide, please. So most of our services are remote. We have a Connect helpline that runs here at the office. We have Cauda Equina Syndrome buddies who we can connect with people who have Cauda Equina Syndrome. Our buddies are people with Cauda Equina Syndrome who've had it for longer than 3 years. We offer a monthly newsletter for our members, creative writing workshops, and we have a service for employer and colleague training. So we will go to people's employers if they're struggling at work to have their peers understand what Cauda Equina Syndrome means for them. And we do have medical student education. So we work with John Radcliffe and Aston Medical University training student doctors. And just a mention of our new app that's coming out soon. So we will be launching that perhaps just after Christmas. So please do keep your eyes open for that. Next slide, please. And really, just a spider diagram here to sort of show how the charity is set up. So we get patients from the website, the helpline, the online support group, hopefully from our new app when it's launched, and the NHS referrals. I've been through the psychosocial therapy services we offer and some of the education services. We just recently had a conference at Stoke Mandeville that went really well on Monday, so we're really pleased with that. So if you do work with people with Cauda Equina Syndrome, please do refer them to the charity because there's lots of ways we can help them sort of adjust to living life with Cauda Equina. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll just quickly mention 2 surveys we recently did. So these were done over this summer and autumn. So we surveyed over 379 members in the group. And we found out that less than 5% of people leave hospital with any information about Cauda Equina Syndrome, either about the diagnosis or what to expect. So from my own situation in 2010, nothing much has changed there. There's still people with the same problems I had. 69% said healthcare professionals didn't really understand Cauda Equina Syndrome, and that is really the impact on life after surgery and the sort of ripple effect it has on families and jobs and finances and things as much as it is about the physical stuff. 67% found even family members and carers struggled to understand the impact of Cauda Equina Syndrome. A lot of family members think if you have your back operation, you should be back better. They can't understand the hidden side of it. And unfortunately, Cauda Equina patients are still leaving hospital without the resources and information they really did need to manage the condition. Next slide, please. Another survey I'll mention quickly is about mobility. So we surveyed the group about mobility. and found that 71% of our group, and we do have a lot of chronic Cauda Equina Syndrome patients, because if people get better, they tend to leave us. So 71% of people in our group use a mobility aid. 32% of people, can't leave the house independently without walking aids. Of the people that were surveyed, 37% said they would be reluctant to use a wheelchair despite agreeing that they had a need to use one. And that was for reasons because of sort of social perceptions about being disabled and being in a wheelchair, but also feeling that they were perhaps frauds being in a wheelchair and also being able to walk. And of the people that said they might need a wheelchair, 40% of those said they were experiencing falls on a weekly or monthly basis. So there is a need for Cauda Equina patients perhaps to have this discussed in hospital, whereby a wheelchair might help them get out and about the house safely, and so they can enjoy life a little bit more and not be so isolated at home. Next slide, please. So how can you refer patients to our charity? There's a referral form on our website that you can access via the scan code here, or just jump on the charity website and have a look for the referral section. So people can self-refer and healthcare professionals can. You can email directly to the charity to refer people, ring us on the helpline. And we've also got a healthcare professional newsletter that will help you keep up to date with services and things that we can offer patients that you can pass on to them when you come across them. Thank you for listening. The poem, if we managed to share it at the end of the slides now, it was written by Katrina. So Katrina came to our charity after spending 7 years at home, isolated alone with her mum. She'd never left the house. She came to volunteer for us for a short while, and then she went to do some part-time work at a learning disability charity, which she's fantastic at, and she's gone on to now be the charity manager. So she's one of our success stories, but she's a very powerful writer, and this is Katrina's poem about adjusting to Cauda Equina Syndrome. Thank you. Do you want to play the video? Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. Apologies for the sound. We lost the sound on it. But thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks very much, Claire. What fascinating and candid presentation. I think we've all really come to appreciate the issues that you're experiencing and other Cauda Equina patients are experiencing, and it's really brought them to life. So I'm very grateful to you for sharing such personal, intimate experiences with us. I'm going to hand over now to Julianne Moore, who's a partner in the medical negligence team, and she'll chair the panel discussion with our various experts.
Thanks so much, Kevin, and it's been really a privilege to listen to Claire's story. I've listened to it a few times, and I know it's not easy to keep sharing that. So thank you, Claire, on our behalf for doing that. So I've got the job of chairing the Q&A today, and thank you so much for the questions that have been submitted. I'm also keeping my eye out on the Q&A box to see if anything else comes through. But I also want to say thank you very much to our speakers who've agreed to take part in the Q&A panel. And we also have Michelle Donald, who many of people have heard today referenced, is a accredited psychosexual therapist. So we're going to bring Michelle into the panel as well. So I'm going to start off first with you, Michelle, if that's okay, because we heard quite a bit really helpful from Cosine from a psychologist's point of view about psychosexual support and issues. But I know that you're a long-standing accredited psychosexual therapist, and I just wanted you to sort of set out from your point of view what advice that you can give to the audience today. We know we've got a mixture of healthcare professionals and people living with Cauda Equina, so I thought it'd be quite nice to bring you in at this point just for you to set out your viewpoint and what you think people can do to help.
Hi there. I don't know if people actually know. So sorry to see you.
We can see you. We're having trouble hearing from you, Michelle.
My volume's up.
I think it's just breaking up slightly.
Is that any better?
That's perfect. Thank you, Michelle.
Right.
Technology is great, isn't it? But when it works, that's brilliant.
I put the microphone onto my telephone instead of onto my computer, and I don't know
Excellent.
why that works. Okay.
It's worked. We're here. Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't know if any of or everybody knows, I'm actually paralyzed. So I'm paralyzed at T12, and I've been a wheelchair user since 1996. And that's what got me involved in psychosexual therapy, because nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to talk to my partner about it. And we really, really struggled. And so looking at, everybody is unique. And everybody, we have different cultures, we have different religions, we have different ways that we've all been brought up, and especially sexually. So often there, with a spinal cord injury, with Cauda Equina, often comes with that a lot of shame around how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our bowels and bladder. I talk to a lot of people with Cauda Equina that still haven't told their partners about how they go to the toilet, and they can hide that. So it is one of the things, the sexual side of things is one of the things that often is last. And as Cosine said, it is very much, it's so emotional. It's so emotional that it's also one of the last things that we want to talk about for many people. For some people, like me, originally, it was one of the first things I wanted to talk about. But actually, it can be more grief invoking. Literally, at the end of the day, you sort yourself out, you get your house sorted, you get so much sorted, and then you go, God, this still isn't right. I still don't feel like I've got this. And then you have to open up again, and sometimes that opens the grief. So what I say is, really, for everyone, this is really different. It comes at different times, talking about sex and sexuality. So it's about your timing. And actually, to the healthcare professionals out there, what we can do is signpost straight away A lot of people still have a value that if I have a physical disability, I'm not worthy, or I can't have sex, or if I don't feel my genitals, what's the point? And that's something that I hear all the time. And actually, when we work with this, and I know this through all of my clients, when we work with this, it can be so amazing and so beautiful, and we can find so many different ways through. So, sorry, just as a starting point, Julianne.
That was brilliant, and I know, Michelle, if we'd had the time, we would have loved to have you join it. I'm sure we can do another session where you can obviously do your talk as well on, from your experience. So thank you for that. So again, Cosine's covered this really well in her talk, and Claire, I think this is one for your good self, because in terms of what we can do in the acute setting, and how do we start addressing sexual function? Is there anything in the inpatient when people are on the ward? And I know, for example, Cosine talked about staff training, she talked about written information and peer support, but from your perspective, someone that's has a lived-in experience and also works with a lot of people with Cauda Equina, what else do you think can be done?
A lot of the things Cosine said, I completely identified with. Being the patient, it just resonated so much with me, and it was so comprehensive. And she really did nail all of that, Cosine, really, loads of it. I think from the patient point of view, mine was reaching out to healthcare professionals or the staff that were there, and there was obviously, it wasn't an embarrassment from my point of view. I was desperate for an answer, and it was their reluctance to discuss it and being dismissed. And obviously, I understand that there's probably no training or not how to speak to somebody about that. But actually, Cosine touched on this. The knowledge is power. So whatever you share with patients will help them. Even if it's bad news, it will help them. It helps them just put things in a place in their mind. But yeah, we have been reached out. Nurses reach out to us and ask if we can support them with sort of training around this issue, and also around delivering bad news. So it's something we'll have to look at, I think, as a charity. But yeah, as a patient, I think not any conversations welcome as a patient. From my point of view, I know some people don't want to talk about things like that. When I saw Michelle, when I saw Michelle, it was 18 months after it happened to me, and I felt it was too late. I thought the damage had been done. So perhaps Michelle said refer as soon as you can. Exactly, that would have stopped perhaps that even happening at that time.
Thanks for that, Claire. I know Michelle's got her hand up, so I think she's going to add something in here, aren't you, Michelle?
I think signposting is a really good thing to actually have. Even if the training isn't there, and it's difficult to get training into spinal centres, rehab centres and hospitals to get staff together. So I think signposting is massive, and to put a resources list together, that's something that I do have. But there's a brilliant charity called Enhance the UK. They do staff training on disability and sexuality. Enhance the UK also have what's called a Love Lounge. And the Love Lounge is excellent. So they're non-expert experts, they call themselves. And literally, this is about the peers. And, as it's been said, the peers are really important people to have around. We can hear them because we know they've got that experience. And I think it's so important. So the Love Lounge is brilliant. And if the Love Lounge don't know an answer from their mass experience, they will contact experts who will then give them that answer, and they'll come back to you. So it's also quite anonymous as well. So a lot of people like the fact that, somebody they don't know, or somebody that knows somebody doesn't know about the questions they're answering. So I think in healthcare settings, that's a really great place to refer out to.
That's fantastic. And actually, Michelle, if we get details from you, when we send up the follow-up after this, we can hopefully add those details on, so people have got details of the Love Lounge. So thank you for that. I'm sorry it's a bit noisy here in the team today. But also, Claire, whilst I remember, you're doing that fantastic app at the minute, aren't you, for Cauda Equina Champions charity? Is that something that you're thinking about including on your app? And do you want to explain a little bit about what the app will do?
Well, basically, the app addresses the education part of the fact that patients are leaving without the education about Cauda Equina Syndrome. So it goes into the condition, it goes into what to expect, goes into managing your bladder and bowels. Yep, links to signposting services, hopefully into Michelle and Sue who work with us at the charity for psychosexual therapy, and just basically any information that we can get on there that we think patients need and they ask for, we're going to put that onto the app. And it'll also be a place where they can record their progress, so they'll be able to look back and see how far they've come in the last 6 months and what things they've achieved. So they'll be able to reflect on the sort of moving forward as well. That's what we hope to achieve with that. Thanks.
That's fantastic, and we know that that's the way that a lot of things are moving forward. It's really successful if you can build one of those. So, Kosi, not leaving you out now. So another question that's come through, and again, you might want to answer this, then followed up by Michelle, is what would you recommend? Would you recommend someone to go through CBT and clinical psychology first before engaging in psychosexual therapy, or is that dependent on the individual?
I think it's dependent on the individual. It really is. Some people need to go through basic issues before they can proceed to psychosexual. Some want to do it at the same time, concurrently. It's got to be individualised and what they're ready for.
Michelle, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add to that at all. Just agree with Kosi.
I totally agree. And actually what we can do is refer between us. We have that being able to say, actually, it may be a good idea at this point that you see psychology first, or actually let's work with this and see where it takes us. The psychosexual therapy, what I would actually say is it is one of the things that does evoke grief, as does a lot of counselling and psychology work. So to actually be able to move between us is really important, to know that they're safe in our hands as well.
That's fantastic. And we've had a couple of questions in terms of obviously things that people can do. I know we don't have a urologist here, but again, if the panel feel comfortable to answer these questions, please do. So one of the questions that we've had through on the pre-advanced questions were, is the use it or lose it advice true? So should you stimulate even if you cannot feel it, or is this pointless? So again, I don't know who's happy to answer that question. We know that we haven't obviously got a urologist here, but just from your experiences working in this field. Michelle, I don't know if you want to add in anything there.
Again, it's about that person and their individuality. So use it or lose it, that's up to them and how they feel about it. Some people, excuse me, I'm going to talk people with penises at the moment. Some people feel very much that actually I don't want to touch it, I can't be friends with it, it doesn't work in a way that I'm used to, and actually to psychologically to go there is difficult for them. Some people want to, pardon the expression, just be rough with it and be really harsh and want to play. But actually, what's happening for them if they're not feeling the sensation? So psychologically, where is it taking them? So when you say use it or lose it, it's about what that particular person means about that. So is that about it being psychological, or is that more physical? In the fact that they're wondering whether or not if they don't ejaculate, will that cause them problems? No, you're not going to explode. But a lot of people will say that to me. If I don't use it, what's going to happen? Ejaculate will dissipate back into the body. It is sterile. Sometimes you can, sometimes it will come out through urine. So it's about whether it's a retrograde ejaculation and it's gone backwards. So there's a lot of the physical there as well, but it will not do you any harm.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And then similarly, another question that we've got is, will the sensation ever come back, or is this my life from now on? And again, I don't know who's comfortable to answer that question.
You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a question I get asked by nearly every client that I see with Cauda Equina. Will it ever come back? And And for some people, depending on where they are within their diagnosis, for some people, there might be slight changes, but more often than not, and I can't put a time frame on it, but more often than not, the sensation that you have is the sensation. And often I am the first person to tell people, a lot of the people in the spinal center say, oh, this might happen or that might happen. It's a really hard place to come from to say, actually, for the majority of people, what they feel now is often what they're going to feel. Yes, slight changes might happen. Yes, medication might have an impact. Always check your medication, because sometimes we think it's the Cauda Equina causing less sensation when it's actually the medications that we're taking. Don't ever come off your medications without advice, but really think about what pain meds you need to be on, and constantly think about, actually, if I come off some of those, it's like a weighing scale. So it is, sometimes it's about, actually, let's look at how we now do this differently. Because is it all about genital sensation, or actually let's think about the rest of our bodies? Where is our sensation coming from? What's going on in our brains? How can we get the serotonin, the oxytocin, the dopamine firing off in our heads so that we get those sensations again, but from a different point in our body?
That's really helpful advice. Thank you very much, Michelle. Well, we haven't had any more questions to come through, so just want to say thank you to Cosine, Michelle and Claire for being part of the panel. And I'm going to hand back to Kevin, who will now close today's webinar. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Julianne. Clearly, it's a massive subject. We've only really been able to scratch the surface in the time we've got available today, but hopefully it's given food for thought for everyone on the support, not only that is required, but also the support that's available. Thanks for attending the webinar this afternoon, and a huge thanks to all our speakers for giving up their time to share some of their knowledge with us today. If we can ask you to complete the feedback form about how you found the webinar, that will help us ensure that our webinars are exactly what you want, and also help us to plan some future content. At Irwin Mitchell, we're privileged to work with some fantastic charities, and their details are shown on the screen now. These will help you signpost to any that might be of interest and help to you and your clients or patients. And finally, we have another webinar which is planned for early in the new year, so be sure to look out for that on our website. Thanks once again for joining us this afternoon, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.